Hi, this is Pastor Scott Bright from Berkeley Hills Lutheran Church, here with the sermon for the fifth Sunday of Pentecost that was originally preached on July the 5th, 2020. It's based on this lesson from the 11th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus said, "But to what will I compare this generation? It's like a bunch of kids sitting in the marketplace and calling out to one another, 'We played the flute for you and you didn't dance. We wailed and you didn't mourn.' John the Baptist came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, 'Look, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners.' Yet wisdom is vindicated by her deeds." At the time, Jesus said, "I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and intelligent and have revealed them to babies. Yes, Father, for such was your gracious will. All things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Come to me, all you who are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. So I recently watched the documentary by the BBC, about a 2-hour documentary in two parts, an hour, and then it was followed up by a second hour that was filmed a couple years later, a little follow-up of about the Amish and about an Amish community in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and in particular about 3 families, young families, who had either been excommunicated by the Amish, kicked out of the Amish community, their word is shunned, either had been shunned or were on the verge of it. I always had a admiration for the Amish. I went to college in an area where there were Amish. I went to seminary in an area where you would see these folks quite a good bit. And yes, there are certain things that I have a problem with. I think walling themselves off from the world is not really a good Christian approach. Not a fan of that. I certainly am made very uneasy by their insistence that education stop at 8th grade. It's like if they don't want you to learn anything that's going to lead you to ask uncomfortable questions. But I've always really admired the simple lifestyle. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying easy lifestyle, and I'm not saying they don't have real world problems. But that's their goal, to keep their life straightforward and simple, their language. And I've always really admired how they are defined by their faith. You cannot for a minute, if they look in the mirror, if they go out, if they see some of their friends or family, there's no mistaking. And people around them cannot mistake that they're Amish. It defines everything about them. I always found that really kind of cool. But the documentary has pointed out that there are some dark sides to that, particularly to the cultural distinction, because it is highly, highly regulated. The leaders of the religious community of the Amish, they use the word bishop, their bishops dictate everything from the precise haircuts that are allowed, to what clothes colors are allowed, to what precise shade of gray you can paint your buggy. All of these have to be followed, and if they are not followed, you run the risk of being shunned. You could be kicked out of the community, which means that you are kicked out of this very isolated lifestyle, and it's all that you know. And it also means that you are kicked out of the church, and in their thinking, that means also you lose your salvation. It might be an oversimplification, but according to this thing I was looking at, you paint your buggy the wrong shade of gray, still gray, the wrong gray, they will tell you you could be going to hell because you're disobeying the community. The couples in this documentary, and this is why I found this thing so fascinating, the reason why these people were being kicked out was not because they had the wrong fashion choices or painted their buggy the wrong color. They were being kicked out, and some of them had been, for, and I swear this is true, attending Bible studies, meeting together and having Bible studies. At first, Bible studies just with other Amish people. It was not allowed. Reading the Bible in English was not allowed. Now, many of the Amish, their first language is kind of a mishmash, sort of a pidgin of English and German called Pennsylvania Dutch, right? Or Pennsylvania Dutch. But there's no translation of the Bible in that dialect. So the Bible that they read is an old German translation, which frankly many of them cannot understand. And they cannot read it in English that they could understand, and there's no opportunity for them to read it in Pennsylvania Dutch, which they would definitely understand. And to do that, to read it in a way that they can get, is against the rules, and you could be excommunicated. They have put the rules literally above the Bible. They have put the rules above learning about Christ. I was taken aback by this. It is the rules that save you, not even Jesus. From the gospel lesson, from Matthew 11, 26th verse. I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth. 25th verse, excuse me. My handwriting is sloppy. From the 25th verse, I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from wise and intelligent people and have revealed them to babies. The things being the way that God comes to us, the knowledge of salvation and hope and peace. Jesus here, I want you to be careful when you hear this. Jesus is not being anti-intellectual here. He is not going along with the Amish who would say, don't learn anything after 8th grade because you're going to learn things that will make you question. Not saying that at all. It's not consistent with the other things that Jesus teaches. Jesus seems to be very much for learning and studying and knowing what's going on in the world. He's not anti-education. What he is saying here instead, and this is very big, is that faith is not an intellectual process. Faith is not a matter of knowing the right things or thinking the right way or having enough willpower. It's not a matter of just mental determination or focus or concentration. You are not saved by what you know. You're really not. You're not saved by what you know. You're not saved by how good you are. You're not saved by your determination to be saved. And you're not saved by the rules. So the Amish are known for getting around by horse-drawn buggies. They also do most of their farming with horse-drawn instruments. If it's either human-powered or it's drawn by horses. In Jesus's day, they would do their farming using oxen. Very similar. They're a little more powerful, right? And they would have a pair of oxen hooked to a plow or to a wagon. And the way they would do this, just to make it easy for the animals, is put yokes on them. I'm going to show you, here's my sermon notes for this week. And as I do in my sermon notes, I draw pictures all the time. And here is a picture of a yoke. This is a wooden contraption. It would be about 8 feet long. It's got metal rings hanging down. Those U-shaped pieces of wood would go around the necks of a pair of oxen. In fact, you don't say a pair of oxen. You say a yoke of oxen. 2 oxen fit together in a yoke. It puts the pressure on places where it's safe for them, on their shoulders, not on their trachea. They won't get choked by the thing, and it helps them to carry a load. Jesus says, "Come to me, you that are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Taking Jesus upon you, taking the yoke of Jesus upon you, is actually freeing. It's not a burden. First of all, it means you're not alone. If you are yoked to Christ, you are yoked to Christ with other people. It's the way a yoke works, right? It's not just you and Jesus, it's you and all of God's people together. It also means that you are not weighed down by the other burdens of the world. If you are yoked to Christ, if you have the burden of the gospel, it means you don't have the burden of having to know the right things, being a perfect person, being perfectly determined and never slacking off, following the rules perfectly. Those things are not what save you. That pressure is off. That's what it means. You carry Christ. You are not carrying all that other nonsense. But to carry Christ, to be yoked to Christ, to bear that burden, the light burden, means to be steered by the love of God and steered by the love of neighbor. To be bound to Jesus is to be freed from yourself, to be freed from perfection, from envy, from fear, from guilt, from jealousy, from anger, all that list. I preached this sermon first on the 5th of July. We had just missed American Independence Day. But still at that point, there was a lot of still celebration and people getting together in socially distant tiny groups, but with flags and with appreciation for the gifts that God has given to this country in particular, and the freedoms that God has given to people of the United States and to the history of the United States. Knowing that that's not a perfect history, not knowing that there is many, many struggles and we're still going through those things, but thanking God for those freedoms. But at the same time, as Christian people, we need to remember, more than all of that, that true freedom does not come from being independent from anything, but being yoked to Christ. True freedom is dependence on Jesus, your Lord, who loves you, who keeps you, and who saves you. Amen.